Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Welcome to the June edition of ChangeMakers on Tuesdays. Apologies for the tech gremlins which infected Zoom today. So for those of you who've been on a bit of a circuitous journey to get here, thank you for sticking with it. We've all aged about a year in the last 5 minutes, but thank you to our CFI colleagues for sorting that out. One of the casualties of our techie issue is there's not the normal title slide music, which I know you're all looking forward to hearing the girl from Ipanema, but it's not going to happen this month. So welcome to ChangeMakers on Tuesdays. If you haven't joined us before, this is the forum where too much talk about place-based work is never enough. We get together about once every month when we can on the second Tuesday of the month. And talk about place-based change and what's going on around the country. So welcome, everybody. Thanks, Rachel. I think we'll dispense with the title slides so we can all see each other a bit better. We'll start, as we always do, by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country that we're on. I'm here in Brisbane, so it's the Yagra and Turrbal people. So I invite you to maybe pop a message in the chat where you're joining us from and pay your respects to elders on your country. Now, last month, May, we didn't have a ChangeMakers event because there was a very, very exciting and important event on, which was the launch of the Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership, which we're very pleased to welcome Michael Hogan here this month to tell us all about the Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership. Michael's the executive convener of Thriving Queensland Kids. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Matthew. Hi, everybody.
Now, Michael, we'll get to Thriving Queensland Kids in just a minute. But for those of you who don't know Michael, we thought we'd just tell you a little bit more about his background. Michael, I think I'm right in saying you started your career in the law with the Aboriginal Legal Service in Sydney. Is that right?
Well, as a student volunteer, as a law student, that's right, Matthew. A long time ago, working both at Redfern Legal Centre and the Aboriginal Legal Service in Redfern for a while, actually under the supervision of Robert Tickner, who obviously went on to even much more significant things and continues to be a really important change maker as it happens. So I was really incredibly fortunate to go to law school and get involved in some of those community organisations at a time when there was a real strong commitment to, I guess, public work and connections for universities into communities and to social change work.
And Robert, of course, went on to be Indigenous Affairs Minister at the time that the Mabo decision came out or went through the Parliament and the response to the Parliament. He is also my old boss at the Red Cross and is still around. He's running a justice reinvestment and reform initiative around the country. So it's a small world.
What?
Sorry, Julie, I think you might be...
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Julie, you might have just come off mute. Thanks very much, Julie. So, Michael, you then went into the public service and you worked in the public service in New South Wales and in Queensland. I think you you worked in premiers for a while and in sort of social services portfolios in both states. What's the differences between the New South Wales and the Queensland public service?
Good question, Matthew. So I actually started off a bit of a stint in the Department of Youth and Community Services, as it then was, and then I actually left government and went and worked for the not-for-profit sector. So I was at the Public Interest Advocacy Centre for 10 years and then ended up going back into government in the Premier's Department in New South Wales, where really my first engagement with place-based initiatives a while ago, and then worked there for 5 years and then came to Queensland as the Deputy Director General for Community Engagement in the Premier's Department up here. I guess I would say that the really strongly formational work for me in my career has been the work in the not-for-profit sector with the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, and then that early work in government in New South Wales with a focus on strengthening communities, on place-based initiatives. A week after I started, I was sent to Cabramatta because of the terrible consequences of an epidemic of heroin that was going through Sydney and other parts of Australia at that time. And that led to a series of place-based initiatives and strengthening communities unit and strengthening communities initiatives that came out of that work that we did back in the mid-90s. And all of that then, I was really fortunate when I moved to Queensland to come into a role, as I said, I'm Deputy Director General Community Engagement, at a time when then Peter Beattie, who was the Premier at the time, and Glenn Davis was the Director General of the Premier's Department, really wanted to shift the relationship between government and community in Queensland. And there was a window of really major commitment and initiatives to try and sort of shift that dial. And from that role, I ended up in the Department of Communities and had done various roles before spending 6.5 years as the Director General of Child Safety, Communities, Child Safety and Disability Services prior to the NDIS, and then until a couple of years ago as Director General of Child Safety, Youth and Women.
Those who just joined us, apologies for the techie issues. If you've been on a little bit of a world tour of the internet to get here today, thanks for your patience. There was a Zoom gremlin, so thanks for making it all the way through. Our guest, special guest this morning is Michael Hogan, who's the Executive Convener of the Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership, and we're just talking to Michael about his early career, and we're about to talk to him about the very exciting initiative that is the Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership. But Michael, just before we leave your public service career, so your last role before leaving the public sector was, as you said, the Director General at Child Safety and Youth and Women. That's a uniquely grueling portfolio at times. So from your perspective, working in central agencies and then working, right at the coalface in those very difficult issues in our community. And in those departments, there's a whole lot of really talented, committed people doing their very best to make change. But from your perspective, working inside government, outside government, where's the change going to come from? Where's the reform going to come from, do you think?
I think the change has got to come from people both in and outside government, Matthew. There are change makers and advocates inside government agencies at all levels, from the front line, from community level all the way through to senior leaders and ministers who we look to try and drive change. And I have an awesome respect for folk working in whichever sector, whether it's not-for-profits or philanthropy or the universities or in government. If they're dissatisfied with the status quo, and if they're dissatisfied by the enduring patterns of disadvantage and adversity, everyone's working their butts off to try and either respond to how they see that in people who come through the door, or to try and fix those systems. And I just have a deepest respect and regard for anyone in any sector at any level who's trying to fix and deal with those issues.
It seems to be a feature of government, certainly in Australia, that there's an awful lot of accountability processes that take up an awful lot of time and energy of institutions and leaders. But sometimes from some perspectives, you might think, well, sort of there's all these accountability processes, except for accountability for the sort of changes that need to occur to get outcomes for kids and young people and families. Is that how it seemed to you?
Yeah, and look, it's such an interesting issue in itself, Matthew. I have those government departments exercise public power, and they use huge amounts of public resources, and there must be accountability for the value and impact and their performance. But I did, over time, start to really experience the challenges of working in roles that have profound impacts on people's lives, good and not so good, but also trying to make change, and the challenge of navigating this whole superstructure of accountability that public services work in. So obviously you have the minister, you have cabinet, you have the parliament, you have the Auditor General, the Ombudsman, various commissions. And at one point we worked out, we were trying to implement over 600 recommendations simultaneously from various inquiries, reports, reviews, evaluations. And so the system can get really, really quickly stuck in focused on, I've got to tick this box and I've got to implement this recommendation. I've got to report on progress, and lose sight of value and impact. And I used to suggest to the watchdogs and the accountability agencies that they work together to give a strategic approach to what are we trying to do with this system and how are we going to get to where we all want to get there. So I think there's a huge and important focus on accountability, but not enough focus on learning and doing. And I know I've been saying to my ex-colleagues and incoming commissioners and so on over the last couple of years, please take some time to reflect on the consequences of all the accountability without enough learning and without enough learning and from the doing of trying to make the systems work better for families and kids.
If you'd like to ask Michael a question, we're going to do it Q&A style, like on the TV. So just pop your question in the chat, and then we'll come to you and ask you to come off mute and put your question to Michael. So get thinking about things you've always wanted to know from someone who's led a substantial few different agencies at the most senior level in the public sector. So get your typing fingers on and let us know what questions you might have for Michael. Michael, that brings us to one of the projects that you jumped into after retiring from the public service, which was this pretty fascinating study into systems leadership, into all these issues. And I think you interviewed some very large number of leaders across Australia and New Zealand and put these questions to them. Tell us a bit about that study and what did you find?
Yeah, it was a fantastic opportunity and a privilege to be involved in a project team instigated by Karen Struthers, some people will know, former minister in Queensland, who's working for the Benevolent Society on the Every Child Coalition. And Karen approached the Australian New Zealand School of Government and suggested a joint project to look at systems leadership for child and youth wellbeing. And the Every Child Coalition had an incredibly ambitious theory of change, but it really needed it knew it needed to dig into what was the experience and insights from systems leaders about what enabled and what didn't get in the way of change. And so Lynn Hadfield Dodds, who was a former secretary of the deputy secretary in the Prime Minister's Department, and I, with Laura Barnes and Karen, we interviewed about close to 90 systems leaders from every jurisdiction in Australia and New Zealand, and from every system. So we interviewed commissioners, CEOs, directors general, secretaries, emeritus professors about what were they proud of, what were their insights about what enables change and what gets in the way of it, what were their insights about what COVID would do and what we should do collectively to deal with COVID, what were their insights about what had been learnt from the first version of Closing the Gap and what should be done for the Closing the Gap 2. People were incredibly frank with us, but there were some big takeouts from that. And one was the theme that kept on coming up in almost every conversation was the challenge of fragmentation, like the rubs and the disconnects between services and between systems, between professions, between what happens in community at a place level, what happens regionally at a state and territory, and what happens nationally. So that our systems that are supposed to be enabling and supporting child and young people to develop and their families to grow them are just riven by fragmentation. And this is what the heads of these systems and the systems leaders was pointing out. It was really fascinating and very compelling. And a whole lot of other issues, of course, that they identified, the lack of political leadership, the challenge of working in a federation, the guilds and the jealousies between between professions. So lots of reasons for why things aren't working the way we want them to work. There were some fantastic examples of what people had been involved in to try and deal with those challenges. But everyone remarked on how much more there was to do. And And that really led us to think, okay, well, how can we use those insights and actually use those frames around leadership, around investment, around workforce and so on, and try and do something with that. So not just write a report about it, but do something with it.
And a lot of that has gone straight into the design of the Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership, obviously. A few folks have just joined us. Once again, our apologies for the techie issues. Mr. and Mrs. Zoom didn't like us today. So if you've struggled to find your way here, our apologies, but thanks very much for making the effort to follow all the various Zoom links and twists and turns. Michael Hogan's our guest. Michael's the executive convener of the Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership, which we're just about to hear a lot more about. But Lorna, you have a question for Michael.
Thanks, Matt. Michael, I'm just really curious, with your different experiences that you've had inside and outside of government and in NGOs, not-for-profits, what is the power that you think communities have that you would love them to realise they have, but they maybe don't realise or don't yield in the way that they could?
Yeah, fantastic question, Lorna. And of course, power and the dynamics of power and, you know, situational power, relational power are really critical sort of frames for thinking about how systems work and don't work, and what the actors and players in our systems can or can't do. I'll just go back a little bit to a really compelling learning for me when I was in the Premier's Department in New South Wales, and Bob Carr was the Premier at the time, had gone out to Western New South Wales and had met with mayors from across Western New South Wales. And it was a period of drought and really, and a whole, you know, the exodus of young people was really, really stressing and distressing for those communities. And they were looking for ways to sort of reposition them for their economic prosperity and sort of social cohesion and so on. And what came out of that was an initiative, led to a package of initiatives around strengthening communities. But one of the things that we did, and this does showing my age, this is fairly early on in the internet, we created a thing called the Community Builders website. And we opened it up so that people could share their stories of community building. And it just went ballistic, because there were thousands of stories of what different communities had done to organise, to facilitate, to reposition themselves. It could have been, you know, the Deniliquin Ute Muster. It could have been a place-based initiative in Cabramatta, or work in King's Cross or wherever. But it just hundreds and hundreds of examples of what communities were doing to make their community strong. And a combination of leadership and community energy and connection, and an idea of, and some sort of burning platform and a burning ambition about what they wanted for their community. It just blew us away about the power of community. And, you know, I'd worked in the not-for-profit sector. I had a sense of that, but just seeing these examples. So I've just carried that with me ever since, Lorna, about sometimes communities get on and do things with or without governments, whether it's local government, state or national. Sometimes it pulls governments along, kicking and screaming. Sometimes it manages to negotiate deals with governments to support community initiatives. But, you know, when good people come together, coalesce around a problem and an opportunity, it is just you know, I mean, sort of too Pollyanna-ish about it, but that's done so much of what we forever in communities. That's been driven by local leaders and local change agents and activists and networkers making things happen, whether it's sporting groups or, you know, arts and culture or community building or economic development. So much of it's always been led by people who just get up and go and make it happen at a community level.
Michael, we were talking before about at the system level, those leaders and their views about what was holding us back. You've just given us just a lovely example of how things happen on the ground. Now, Thriving Queensland Kids, which you've really incubated from the very first idea, is really about trying to put those two things together, isn't it? So tell us more about Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership, what it's trying to do and how it came about.
Yeah. So either both during and after those conversations with systems leaders, Matthew, that I mentioned before, in the joint ANZOG Every Child project, I started picking up the phone and talking, either ringing people I knew in government and not-for-profits around Queensland, and then I started picking up phones to people I didn't know. And so, the deans of faculties and heads of schools and universities and people in philanthropies who I had no real previous relationship with, and started sort of sharing those insights out of the project and testing it with them and asking the question, so what do you reckon we could do about this in Queensland? And really quickly, people sort of gathered around a couple of themes. We've already got a lot of fantastic organisations. We've got institutes, we've got agencies, we've got statutory authorities, we've got commissions, we've got philanthropies. What was missing was some of the connective tissue. And this was in early 2020. The pandemic was just starting to wash over everybody. Everyone was stretched and stressed about it. And we knew from other disasters that was going to impact most on people who were least likely to have the resources to manage through that. So we sort of quickly then looked at, so what can we do with what we've already got? What can we do with who we've already got? And what can we do with what we already know? And so we sort of really coalesced around those sort of ideas. Let's use who we know, let's use what we've got, and let's use what we know. And let's try and stitch a coalition together that brought the leaders and organisations from those sectors and all of those systems in Queensland. A pretty sort of audacious idea, and see if we can stitch them together so that we can figure out what we can do around some of those systems problems, systems challenges. And like, it just resonated with so many people at so many levels. And so out of that came, after about 6 months or so of sort of dialogue, and this was done with the support of Aracy, with Penny Dakin and her team. We sort of did a webinar, said, let's start something called the Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership. Very quickly, we had the CEO of Health and Wellbeing Queensland, a new statutory body established, Robin Littlewood, come on board. Frank Tracy, the CEO of Children's Health Queensland, the Queensland Mental Health Commissioner. Then we got a couple of Director Generals. Then we had some of the professors from the universities come on board, and they agreed to come together to try and make something of this idea about a coalition that did systems work. 2 years down the track of lots of dialogue and design work and lots of workshops, we've sort of got to a point where we're soon to sort of go into the next phase of Thriving Kids. And that's also been informed by conversations. Some of the folks on the call today, many of you have been in conversations or in network meetings that are shaping what we do through the Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership. So thanks, and call out to anyone who's on the phone, on the Zoom call today, who's contributed to lots of those conversations.
It certainly is an audacious prospect to try and get those massive institutions into the one framework and working for kids. But it's happened, and it, as you said, Michael, a number of us were in the room at the launch at Queensland Parliament House. And a few of us talking about it at the time. We had the Speaker of the Queensland Parliament, Curtis Pitt, who was also former Treasurer here in Queensland, hosting the event. And he talked with great depth and precision about place-based work and collective impact-based work. He's actually the chair of a place-based collective impact initiative in Cairns. I think Kylie Box on the call, involved in Cairns South together. And that was fantastic to have a senior politician so well versed in the work. But what I noticed was all the Directors General in the room, a number of other ministers across Cabinet, all had an intelligent and informed conversation and response about place-based work, which I think a few of us said wouldn't have happened even 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. So it's really, it was pleasing, I think, to see that level of penetration into decision-making. What's next for Thriving Queensland Kids? What's a good year look like in the next year or two?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Matthew. And it was thrilling to have those folks come together at Parliament, and it was the opportunity where we were able to announce a package of really significant co-investment by 4 philanthropic partners. Your foundation, thank you, the Brian Foundation, Hand Heart Pocket, the John Villiers Trust, and the Paul Ramsay Foundation. I should have acknowledged that a lot of my work over the last 2 years has been funded through a fellowship from the Paul Ramsay Foundation, which has been an incredible privilege, an opportunity not just to learn and to have and talk, but to actually get into some doing. And without that sort of catalytic foundational support, we probably wouldn't be where we are. So that's enabled us to stitch together a big package of funding, and together with sort of in-kind and some small cash contributions from the government agencies and statutory bodies, and having the universities lean in, we've now on the verge of starting a portfolio of initiatives that have emerged from those design workshops that we see as integrative and developmental. So they build capabilities and they stitch our systems and workforces together. So we don't want to compete or duplicate with what anybody is doing already and doing well, but we do want to sort of join things together. So people like Kylie and Lorna and others who are involved in place-based, child-focused work in Queensland. We've been engaging Lorna and Kylie and colleagues on their insights about what systems could do better to enable place-based, child-focused work. And we're hoping that that'll sort of grow and really bear fruit over the next year or so. And we did some fantastic workshopping the day after the reception of Parliament with Queensland folks and from Yarrabah and Cairns and Gladstone and other places across Queensland. We have 6 initiatives that we're looking to really start to get into practical implementation of. So we've got what's called the Thriving Queensland Kids Brain Builders Initiative. So one of the things we think that can stitch our workforces together, give them common knowledge and skills and behaviours and uplift capability, is giving them the tools and the insights from the latest from neuroscience and helping them work out how that's applied in their practices, whether it's a librarian or the ECEC worker, a child maternal nurse, all the way through to police officers. We just think there's incredible opportunities to sort of get some system shift by uplifting workforce capability across sectors using, it's not a silver bullet, but it's just something that helps tie things together using the neuroscience. We've got an initiative that the Department of Education are leading to work with the Connect for Children networks. We've got 102 Connect for Children networks across Queensland, been going for a couple of years, and we've agreed that to give them some additional scaffolding in leadership and partnership, and to get their learnings and their skills, and turn that into a program that really scaffolds the work that they do through those networks, doing birth to 5 plans and implementation at a local level. Health and Wellbeing Queensland is going to lead the next phase of work we've done around a Thriving Queensland Kids data roadmap. They're going to do that through the Gen Q initiative, so Generation Queensland initiative, with a focus on equity. So that's incredibly exciting to have them pick up the ball and then take that forward. We're talking to some other groups about picking up all of the work that's been done around the evidence for effective communications about child and adolescent development, and looking for a partner to lead that work across the ecosystem to support folks on the ground, practitioners and organisations, and especially comms people in organisations, use good framing and communications and narratives that avoid the downfalls of some of the ways we often think and talk about families and kids and adolescents.
So like, any one of those things is a massive undertaking. So you're going to be busy, you and colleagues.
We We are. It is ambitious program, and we're going to take 3 years to build them and build momentum and hopefully demonstrate value and impact and learn and adjust. But the beauty of the way it's emerging is that it's not about what Thriving Queensland Kids core team is going to do. It's about what leaders and organisations across our ecosystem can do, using what we've got, using who we've got, using what we know. So if we can distribute leadership and responsibility and get these things happening at various levels, then we've got a much better chance of success and making this sort of impactful and sustainable. Is our sort of theory of action.
Thanks everyone for your questions and comments in the chat. Good point Jeff's making about local level leadership and how we've got to match that with some of the system reforms that we're talking about now. We've probably got time for one last question from Sarah, who's I think asking a really pertinent question. Sarah?
Yeah, Sarah, that's a great question.
Hello, so I'm Sarah Murphy. I used to be Sarah Cleves back in my Queensland days when I was in Logan. And I was back in Queensland just about 4 weeks ago. And the change in Queensland over that 10 years I've been away is astounding. And now being in WA, we're feeling very bereft, looking over at what's occurring over there. And what we're all struggling with is a complete lack of political interest in this kind of work over here. And we're wondering, what has created such a shift in that period of time, and particularly in the last few years, that you're having a launch at Parliament House where you've got a senior parliamentarian who's not just kind of being there as the talking head, but is genuinely committed. And you've got seemingly lots of politicians, lots of senior bureaucrats who not only understand the work, but are committed to enacting it in really practical ways. And what can we learn from that? What can we do?
Yeah, so I think it is a number of sort of factors, conditions, Sarah. One of them is that the frustration that would often be talked about in forums like this, people trying to influence systems, those frustrations are shared by directors general and ministers. Like, ministers, they want to drive value and impact. They want to do good. They want to leave a legacy. The complicatedness that's built up over decades and decades in our systems makes it hard for them to shift. And like we've got a group of systems leaders in and out of government in Queensland that I think have had experience trying to do things. Obviously, Matthew and other colleagues' experience with Logan Together, for example, of what has or hasn't worked, what's enabled that and what's got in the way of it. So a whole lot of learnings from all sorts of levels and perspectives about how can we do better. And of course, then COVID, the perfect storm of COVID, and we've had this incredible experience across the communities of vulnerability and stress and anxiety. We've sort of exposed the challenges and the strengths of our public systems. We've listened to experts mostly. So this, I guess, it's been a moment where relationships that have been built over time. We've got a government that's into its third term. It's still looking to drive change. It's sort of frustrated about what it has or hasn't been able to achieve. It's building on foundations it's laid, and then a whole lot of leaders in the not-for-profit sector, in philanthropy, and in the universities who have found some common cause. And I think with a bit of glue, and everyone's so busy, everyone's overwhelmed and being thrashed by demand and the challenges of prioritizing. The fact that we've been able to create a bit of space for leaders to play and to learn, to connect, and it's very early days. Like, I don't want to over-promise or over-claim, but we've created a space and something bigger than everybody that they've been able to coalesce about. even if they don't not quite entirely sure what we're doing and where we're going to go and where we're going to end up. It is a bit of a journey, but there's been enough glue to, and enough trust and credibility in the people we've brought together to sort of, go with it. The proof will be in the pudding, I guess, over the next 3 years.
Well, Michael, congratulations on the Thriving Queensland Kids Partnership. It's you're playing an incredibly important leadership role in Queensland, but I think around the country doing this sort of work and the systems leadership work. And of course, your work as a very senior, compassionate and committed leader in the public sector for decades before that. So thank you for being so frank in your views on all of the above and sharing the Thriving Queensland Kids journey. And everyone, if you'd join with me in thanking Michael in the Zoom way of jazz hands for clapping, or you can clap, whatever you like. Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, everybody. That was really terrific. Thank you. And I love listening and participating in ChangeMakers. So yeah, you'll see me again. Now,
we would normally have a quick breakout, so into small groups where you could meet each other and have a little bit of a chat. Because of the Zoom gremlins, we had to start a little bit late, so we're running a little bit short of time. And we want to hear from our next guest, who is the very wonderful Lorna McGinnis, who's the backbone leader at the GREAT initiative, the Gladstone Region Together initiative. Now, some of you will have noticed that we advertised Jessie Sleep from the Far West Community Partnerships Initiative in South Australia. This has gone very, very smoothly this month. That one was my fault. Jessie's actually coming in July next month. So great story about what they're doing in Ceduna and that very far west part of South Australia. But this month, we've got something that's going incredibly well in central Queensland. Lorna, welcome.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure to be here. And like Michael, I echo that I really enjoy these ChangeMaker sessions.
Now, for those of you who aren't in Queensland, you may not know where Gladstone is. So let's start there, Lorna. Where the hell is Gladstone?
Where the hell is Gladstone? Okay, so Gladstone is central Queensland, as you say. Hopefully you can see my screen here as well. So we've got a little image there of where Gladstone is within Queensland. We're quite a reasonably diverse community here. Population of sort of 63,000-ish at the moment, and quite a sort of recognised town as being an industrial town. So we've got some global giants across energy, LNG, coal, exporting, major port. So we're fairly significant in Queensland economics, which plays a big part in our social impacts here in Gladstone.
And also a bit of boom and bust sort of cycles in the town as well over time, I'm sure.
Absolutely. In fact, actually, the reason we're in this space at the moment is that we're recognised as a stronger places, stronger people community, demonstration community. And the way that Gladstone became identified as a regional Queensland town compared to some of our counterparts that are similar size communities, we wouldn't normally stand out as being a community of significant disadvantage or socioeconomic need compared to some of our surrounding regional areas. But with that boom bust cycle, we really saw a significant shift in our demographic and in our demand on services, which Michael just mentioned in regards to that overwhelming. I love the thrashed by demand, Michael. That's exactly how I think our service providers would explain what they went through in about 2016 until probably today.
And Lorna, just I'll let you run through the rest of the Gladstone story in a second, but I've just noticed in the paper this morning that the federal government's come to town and is visiting you. And the very new Social Services Minister, Amanda Rishworth, I think is paying you a visit tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yes, we're looking very forward to meeting our new minister here tomorrow. And then we actually have our State Minister, Leanne Enoch, coming this week as well. So, yeah, Gladstone's a bit of a magnified region at the moment with the movement towards hydrogen outside of other social, economic, environmental issues. The economic aspect from a hydrogen growth perspective is keeping us on the map.
Well, no pressure, Lorna, but if those visits don't go well, we're all stuffed. So good luck.
I'm not feeling the pressure. The weight is on the shoulders, I can tell you, but I've been practicing my key messages. So
very good. All right, I'll hand it over to you. Run us through the Gladstone Region Together story.
Sure, thanks, Matt. So we're on Bailey, Gureng, and Tarablang Bunda land here in the Gladstone region, beautiful Gladstone region, bottom of the Southern Great Barrier Reef. And in addition to industry, big heavy industry, we also have a tourism and agricultural industry that has sort of been traditionally kept us going here. As I say, our demographic and our social indicators here in Gladstone over the decades wouldn't normally have put us on the map as really in need of this high-level, place-based, community-led work. However, in recent times with that boom and bust cycle, what we did see is a real shift in demographic as a result of low rent, and Gladstone becoming a massive magnet during times of high rents across Queensland, of people moving into the area looking for an improved cost of living, a reduced cost of living. And unfortunately with that, there comes a large number of shifts in social indicators, in demand on services, and particularly of concern to us was our child safety stats. So that was really the part that started the conversation here in Gladstone about, as a community, what did we see was acceptable? And really, when you're talking about child safety, you're really looking for a zero. There really, whether that's achievable or whether that's idyllic is a different question, but there really isn't a number that's acceptable for children on protection orders. So for us, that was really the driver. And when we were invited by our state and federal partners to participate in the Stronger Places, Stronger People initiative, the fact that we did have that big divide between those that were doing really well and thriving and were kind of the Queensland pin-up picture in terms of people paying off mortgages, putting their kids through uni and doing well with the resource industry. On the converse side, we knew that there was a large number of families and children in our community that really weren't doing so well and really needed our attention as a community. So very much driven by the fact that we could see that economic inequality. We knew that there were children that needed further protections and parents in that case as well that also needed further support to be able to do the best they could for their kids within a community support system that was beyond their own frame of reference in some cases when we look at breaking the cycle of disadvantage. That was our driver. The fact that we were given the opportunity by state and federal government to join the Stronger Places, Stronger People initiative allowed us to be quite ambitious in our aspirations as a community. And we set ourselves the goal of opportunity, equity, and quality of life for everyone in our community. And I'd like to talk a little bit about when we talk about conditions, sort of what we mean by community-led from the Gladstone perspective, recognising that each place-based initiative is different, but there's lots of similarities as well. The Stronger Places, Stronger People initiative in Gladstone gave us the opportunity to partner cross-sectorally, so not just government, but also our university. CQ University has partnered with us. Rio Tinto, one of our major industry players, has come to the party as well and is at the table with us. In fact, I've just left a training session. We have Mark Yedeka-Poulsen in town today from CFI, and our Rio Tinto partner is in that room with some of our community members talking about power and equity. So a great day to be having this conversation on. But certainly seeing not only our major, what community would call major players in terms of those with the power, the decision making and the money, but also seeing all of our service providers that are experiencing that overwhelming demand and our community members coming to the table to participate in the work. So working under a collective impact model, which is what the Stronger Places, Stronger People initiative is built on. So the collective impact model built by John Kenya and Mark Kramer in 2011, and a few different iterations of that since. The key aspects of that collective impact framework were based off the successes that we're seeing in other programs in globally that were really seeing change in their communities and what those elements and those conditions were. And for us here in Gladstone, we'd already done some work as a community in the space of looking at a shared community aspiration. We had a few action plans and different iterations of action plans over time. What we didn't have was a backbone team to drive the work. and we didn't have a shared measurement framework to be able to make sure that we were on track and that what we were doing was working well. We did have fairly good community engagement, but it was a bit siloed, a bit hit and miss. And it really, well, the feedback was that there was a large proportion of the community, and probably those that we most wanted to be central to the work, whose voices weren't being heard in some of the previous consultations and aspirations. So that was a key focus area for us in Gladstone, in looking at what do we mean by community-led, and what does that mean for our community members in the way that we engage, and in the way that will create opportunity and equity, and allow communities to control the work going forward. So for us in Gladstone, the first thing we did was talk to community about how they'd like to be engaged. So when we say community, we're talking about everybody that has a stakeholder in our Gladstone community. So that might be residents, the mums, the dads, working, not working, with a sector hat, without a sector hat, in government, outside of government, living in Gladstone, not living in Gladstone, anybody that has some kind of decision-making, stakeholder impacted by life in Gladstone, are part of our community. So our processes include very authentic community engagement, sector voices into the work, bringing all those stakeholder voices into the work, looking at trends and issues, and how that supports the understanding of the priority areas that community have identified. And a lot of the work that we do is about quantifying and defining issues. So let's say, for example, those big silver bullet issues that we'd like to be able to solve, like housing, like skills attraction in regional areas, like how we unsilo, unstick our sector, and enable them to work more closely together. Those are the big issues that we're tackling now at the table with community members, and half the battle seems to be the defining and the understanding the issue. Planning the actions seem to be the easiest part at the moment, and then the measuring the outcomes we're expecting is going to be the next big challenge ahead of us. So we've been extremely lucky in Gladstone to learn from some of our key change makers, including Matthew and Michael and a few others on the call today, and to be able to take the learnings of other SPSC communities and other change makers programs to be able to do this work in a reasonably quick time. We've also been very lucky that a lot of the hard work had already been done in Gladstone. It just didn't have the driver. So having that backbone team now to be able to enable community to work together and come together with that space that Michael was talking about, it's been really one of the key things that we're now seeing a shift in mindset. People are feeling more empowered, and they're feeling more authority. Community members appear to be feeling more authority about actually having a say in how we progress as a community here. So in terms of community voice, as I mentioned, a lot of the work's been defining the issues and then really workshopping what that looks like, learning from previous efforts here in Gladstone, taking the good, leaving the bad, and looking for the continuous improvement. We often talk in here, given that we are a industry town, one of our points of reference for a lot of our community members is that we, being a backbone, we act a little bit like a business improvement team. So that's about looking at the inputs and looking at the outputs and looking at the optimizations, so process flows, looking at all the different ingredients and variables, all the different energy sources, all the different resources, the time, the schedule, and then looking at how we can make improvements all the way through the process flow. So the sixth element of collective impact that was added as one of the newer iterations was systems change. And one of the things that we're really finding in the work in Gladstone, and Michael, you mentioned this, and I think it's so prominent to the work, is looking at what we can do with what we've got, and who do we know and what do we know in terms of being able to make the work happen successfully. So a lot of the conversations we had very early on were that actually we do have a lot of value here. We've got services that are doing a great job. We've got resources, we've got funding going in the right directions, but we're still not achieving the outcomes that we want to for our community and for our children. So getting together to be able to map it, be able to plot where those improvement opportunities are and then work towards them in a really structured way has, I think, provided a level of ownership in the community that we've seen slip away a little bit in the last 4 or 5 years, where people were just they were drowning in the feeling of giving their best efforts, but seeing things gradually get worse, not better.
Lorna, Julie's asked if she can get her hands on this information. I think probably the easiest way is we'll pop it up on platform C, if that's okay with you, Lorna. So our CFI colleagues will just drop in the chat the link to platform C where you can find this info. That's probably an efficient way. We've got about 5 minutes left, so if you've got a question for Lorna, now is the time to pose it. So drop it in the chat. Thanks, Lorna.
Thank you.
Oh, keep going.
I was just going to mention we've had a little bit of a discussion in these meetings as well about the data piece, and we are really keen to be working with Thriving in Queensland Kids Partnership and some of the other great work that's happening in the place-based piece around how do we collectively bring together the knowledge and the data and be able to look at those place-based but statewide and national-wide projects of importance that we're looking at from a data measurement perspective.
Lorna, if I could just ask, Gladstone's really made pretty fast progress. If you look around the country, your initiative from go to quite a mature initiative has been one of the sort of speediest to mature, and you've given us a few reasons for that. From the outside, it seems like your stakeholder group really jumped on board very, very quickly, which is often what takes a lot of the time, is the coalition building. Is that true? And what do you put that down to? And perhaps, what were the lessons for the coalition building that other people might be interested in?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. It's a really good question, and we've done a lot of reflection on that to try and identify what it is. As I say, we did learn from some of the best in terms of the support that we've been given. You can always piggyback when you have other great initiatives that are prepared to share their learnings in such a transparent way. Certainly, though, here in Gladstone, I think we do have an advantage in the fact that being an industry town, some of the global giants that are based here, the Rio Tintos, the Shells, the ConocoPhillips, have over the years brought a lot of the strategic thinking required to do the work. And so when we're talking to community members, we can often find that leverage point that allows them to understand where they do have power in the work. Although it's still a case of not everyone feeling like they've got the authority, and having to make sure that the community know that they have got that power and that it can be led by community. Certainly that has helped the fact that there's been a lot of consultation here and people have seen that they do have a voice and do have an influence. A lot more work still to be done. But I think so far the barriers that we've seen are very limited. The government partners are coming to the table with great generosity in sharing data and enabling problem solving, joint problem solving in a real partnership, authentic partnership way. And we're seeing that across the board, whether it be sector, community members, just the general generosity of people wanting to do this work. And I think just the excitement that there's now a channel to do it.
We're almost at time, Lorna, but I can't resist asking this question. So I think you'll probably be amongst the first of us on the call to have a chance to brief Minister Rishworth in her new portfolio. What are you going to ask her for?
Well, we know we've had the birdie in the ear saying that there's a definite interest in the early childhood planning. So we know that some of the work that we're doing across these communities, is hitting the right mark at the moment in terms of appetite. What we're going to be asking for is that continued support of government to break down the internal barriers around things like data sharing and around getting that real connection at the government level to the community level, so that the third party transition of voice between government and community is becoming shorter and shorter each time. So the data and the community voice, I think, are the two key things that we're really keen to see. Outside of that, some of the practical things that we're going to be selling is the fact that we are working together with these great other collaborations, not just SPSP, but other place-based initiatives, Driving Queensland Kids Partnership, Early Years Catalyst, and that we're trying to join the dots, and that we hope that we can see that across government as much as across community.
Well, Lorna, congratulations on just such a well put together initiative there in Gladstone. You made such quick progress. I think teaches us a lot about what alignment and trust and that sort of groundwork can really achieve in a relatively short space of time. So congratulations. Hope the meetings go well this week. And thanks so much for joining us. Would you please join me in saying thanks to Lorna?
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
All right, we're at time. Next month, we'll have the pleasure of Jessie Sleep's Community of the Month story. That's the Far West Community Partnerships. Really fascinating story about a group of Aboriginal-led organisations and communities within about a 600 kilometre radius around the town of Ceduna in the far west of South Australia. They're achieving some fantastic things. One of those fantastic things is they managed to line up empowered communities, stronger places, stronger people, and connected beginnings, and wrap it all into the one initiative, which is, I think, got some real interesting learnings for us all. So we'll see you second Tuesday in July. We'll have no technology problems next month whatsoever, and we'll even advertise the correct speakers. So have a wonderful month, and we'll see you all in July.